Okay, so our final video in the Major League Commissioners series, we're looking at MLS Commissioner Don Garber. Now, before he joins the MLS, he spent 16 years working for the NFL. And if things had turned out differently, he could be where Roger Goodell is now. Honestly, with the way he was getting promoted through the NFL structures, I am surprised he didn't get a crack at being NFL Commissioner, quite honestly. Because in the 16 years from 1984, he holds various senior positions. 1984, he's NFL Properties Marketing Manager. So already getting into the marketing side of things, which is basically his forte, is advertising the league, getting the league out there, growing the game. So for 4 years, he's NFL Properties Marketing Manager. In 1988, he's NFL Director of Marketing, and we know how good the NFL is at selling itself and marketing itself. Look at the Super Bowl. Look at how much revenue they make from the advertising revenue from the Super Bowl. Look how they market their athletes. They do a great job in selling the product to the American market and overseas. In fact, the NFL is a marketing machine, and you can thank Don Garber for some of the work he did in the 80s. 1992, he is the NFL Senior Vice President of Business Development. So you can see, as every 4 years, he's getting these promotions. At the end of his tenure at the NFL, he was in charge of NFL Europe, and he was a Senior Vice President of NFL International. Now, we know what happened with NFL Europe in the 2000s and how it was wound down in 2007 to be replaced with the international series that we know and love today. But at that time, there was great hope for NFL Europe being a success. There was a real hope that the NFL would pump money in and it would grow the game overseas, and that there would be this successful American Football League in Europe, where they could also recruit talent to then work their way into the main NFL, sort of like a minor league system. It didn't work out, obviously, but that was the plan at the time in the 80s and the 90s. And if things had turned out differently, Don Garber could be where Roger Goodell is now. And I am surprised with the way he was working his way through the NFL management system that wasn't the case. But the MLS have been paying attention, and he's appointed commissioner on August the 4th, 1999. Now, I'm going to look at some key things in his tenure since August the 4th, 1999. There were some minor rule tweaks that he did to realign the MLS League with all the other international leagues around the world. At that time, the MLS didn't have any draws. They had overtime and penalties. So he got rid of that in the regular season. And he also put the referee back in charge of timekeeping. So he realigned the MLS with the other FAs around the world and other top flight leagues around the world. So he did that. But there was a bigger problem. So he succeeds Doug Logan, the inaugural commissioner. And there's a big problem. The MLS has got no money. They've only got 10 teams, and only one team is playing in its own stadium, which is Columbus Crew. And his first major task is getting all the teams into specific, custom-made soccer stadiums, as the Americans would say, as we would say association football stadiums, specific boutique stadiums, because 9 out of the 10 teams are playing in NFL or collegiate college football stadiums that are massive stadiums that seat 60, 70, 80, 100,000 people and only getting 5 to 10,000 fans. It doesn't look good when you're trying to sell the product on TV, and it doesn't look good when you're trying to attract new fans to a team when you've got 90% of a stadium empty. So his goal was to get as many teams, if not all of them, into football proper association football stadiums or soccer stadiums for the North American audience, for those North American viewers who will probably watch this video. Now, in that task, yes, it's generally been successful. More and more teams are now building and owning their own stadiums. Some, however, still use NFL stadiums or collegiate stadiums for their games, but attendance has really risen over the last 25, 26 years since he takes over. So attendance is significantly up. I mean, Atlanta do play in the NFL stadium, but they sell it out. So the marketing side of things has started to work. Now, because he was obviously in charge of marketing at the NFL, by enticing players like David Beckham, and I do mean this, and Kaká and Pirlo and others of a real high calibre from Europe to the MLS in the 2000s and 2010s, that does help when you're trying to sell the product. So right now, Messi, for example, is playing in the MLS. And there's been this succession of really marketable, high-quality, world-class players who've played in the MLS. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, I think, was a godsend getting Ibrahimovic just because of his personality, how he interviews and how he conducts himself and some of his antics. Ibrahimovic was a great sell for the MLS, and this has helped solve some of the league's problems with attendance and finance. There's another thing that's also helped with the league's finances. When he takes over, there's 10 teams. There's 10 teams in the MLS in 1999. So in 2004, we got 10 teams. So 5 years in, this is where we're at, 21 years ago. Now there's 30 teams. San Diego is the latest team to start playing this season. So in 21 years, the league has trebled in size, all under Don Garber. Now we can argue the pros and cons of just constant rapid expansion and whether it is sustainable. And in this time, the US men's national side did fail to qualify for the 2018 World Cup. But also in this time, Canada did qualify for a World Cup for the first time since 1986. So there's some pros and cons. The US national side's gone through some real lows. The Canadian men's sides have now really hit their stride and are actually doing better than the US right now. So while both sides will be at the next World Cup next year as co-hosts, the Canadians, I think, have now overtaken the US in regards to rankings and quality, even though there's only 3 MLS teams in Canada and 27 in the US, which is something we will talk about later on. But the expansion side of things, you could argue, has been good and bad for the league. It has helped with valuations of teams. It's helped with TV deals because you've got more games to sell and more sponsorship rights to sell, so it's helped with media and sponsors rights, and we'll discuss that as well. But at the same time, there is a problem that there isn't enough elite talent in the US and Canada for that matter to fill 30 teams, so they have to have the overseas players and the marquee player rule, which is something else he's brought in. But when you've got players like David Beckham and Messi and Ibrahimovic and Kaká and Pirlo and Gerrard, for example, all coming over to play and do really well in the MLS, you could argue that getting those superstar players has definitely also helped in encouraging young kids to play the game who want to be the next Beckham, the next Messi, the next Pirlo, the next Kaká. So, and also participation at grassroots level has exploded since he's been commissioner. So there's been some positives, but the expansion, you could argue some negatives there. Club valuations is something that's really interesting. And will surprise a lot of people with the average valuation. Some teams are worth more than others. Some teams are not worth a lot of money. Other teams like LA Galaxy, for example, or Red Bull New York Red Bulls are worth a lot of money. But the average valuations have exploded since 2008. So really exploded. So in 2008, the average valuation of a team was $48 million. This is just as the financial crash is about to happen. $48 million. 10 years later in 2018, the year the US misses the World Cup, the average valuation of a team had ballooned to $240 million. So you can see what's happening here. 2 years ago, in 2023, the average value had more than doubled to $540 million. So these teams now, on average, are getting to be quite valuable assets. Expansion fees have shall I say, gone up quite significantly. Oh yes, expansion fees are nearly mirroring club valuations at this point. So bear that in mind, is that it's around $300 to $400 million for an expansion fee now. So you can see where the league is getting a lot of its revenues from very, very quickly. And you could again argue expansion good and bad. It's good for the league's revenues. Now, talking about teams, only the NHL has more teams in the major leagues, apart from the CFL, obviously, which is all Canadian, in Canada with 7. They have 3 teams in Canada at the moment in the MLS. So that's Toronto FC, CF Montreal and Vancouver Whitecaps. They are the 3 teams currently in the MLS from Canada. And that looks like it's had a benefit for the Canadian national side because they qualified for the last World Cup and they're going to be co-hosting this World Cup. And Toronto and Vancouver are also going to be host cities. So you can see that being a multinational league with potential for expansion into Mexico as well, which has been hinted at times, has definitely benefited the Canadian side of things. And there's a lot of Canadian players and there's a good grassroots participation in Canada as well. And so you're starting to see the grassroots game grow in both countries, and the fact that, as I say, there are 3 teams in Canada, only the NHL has more. Now, the other major leagues are looking at Canada, apart from the NHL, as a means of expansion. In a way, Major League Baseball is, the NBA is. They're looking at Canada as potential expansion markets, especially in places like Montreal and Vancouver. Toronto, the NBA and Major League Baseball are already in Toronto. The NFL is a bit cautious about taking the NFL north of the border. They saw what happened to the CFL when they took their league south of the border with expansion, how it really hurt the CFL. So the NFL is a bit more cautious. Obviously, we know the NHL has a solid footing with 2 of the original 6 in Canada and 7 teams in total north of the border. So that's quite interesting how Major League Soccer has more Canadian teams than other major leagues. Media rights is quite interesting. So ESPN and Fox, for example, are big carriers in the US, so they've got domestic rights, and that's really important, and that's worth a lot of money. But MLS matches are now broadcast in 170 countries globally. So they've really, with this marketing now, this is his background, they figured out a really good media deal. 170 countries. But the big deal, the real big one, and I think is a masterstroke, is the deal with Apple, worth $2.5 billion for 10 years. And that's their first deal. It looks like they're going to keep that deal rolling and negotiate it over time. But 2 years ago, so they're 2 years into a 10-year deal with Apple, $2.5 billion. That will go a long way to help your league revenues. A long way. Now, there's some that aren't necessarily happy with the Apple deal. A lot of consumers aren't, and I can completely agree. If you're not an Apple user with Apple TV or an iPhone or an iPad or an iMac or a MacBook, that you may not be able to access that. But the fact they've got ESPN and Fox involved as well is crucial in reaching that wider audience, because they're national carriers. And, ESPN and Fox are in most homes in the US. So they have worked out their media rights really well. They've got, obviously, Sky and Eurosport over in Europe as well. So they've got some really big carriers in the US, some really big carriers over in Europe, and they've also got TSN in Canada. So they've got one of the national carriers in Canada. So they've got some real big media partners globally to broadcast their rights, which is crucial when you're trying to compete with the other major leagues. And they are significantly further behind the other major leagues in revenues and TV deals, but masterstroke. That is another way to really grow your product. 170 countries that the MLS is broadcasting. That is some good going for what many people see as a really weak major league. And a lot of there are some gatekeeper fans from Europe who look down on the MLS. I actually enjoy watching the MLS when I do catch a game. I find it highly entertaining. It's very open. The quality isn't Premier League or La Liga or Bundesliga or Serie A quality, but it's a fun league to watch because it's quite open, and that quality level's a little bit less. There's going to be some more mistakes, but when you have those 1 or 2 marquee players like Messi, for example, I mean, just watching them, even at the latter stages of their careers, people said Ibrahimovic was done when he went over to the MLS. He prolonged his career. Beckham, done, prolonged his career. So some players have actually gone to the MLS and people say, it's a retirement home. They prolonged their careers, come back to Europe, and then won more trophies. So let that sink in. The final thing I want to cover, and this is very controversial with North American sports fans. Now, here in Europe, we're pretty comfortable, or we've got used to sponsorship on our jerseys of sports teams. Sometimes it's a bit overkill with certain leagues and certain sports, but we've got used to seeing sponsors on sports jerseys. The MLS was the first North American major league to have a sponsor on and allow sponsors on their jerseys. Back in 2006, it was Real Salt Lake with a company called Zango in 2006, and that was worth somewhere between $4 and $5 million for the sponsorship. Now every team has a sponsor on their jerseys, and in total 33 major sponsors are now affiliated with Major League Soccer in some way, shape or form. So it has absolutely transformed over the last 20 or so years under Don Garber, and he's done a lot of things well. He's marketed it quite well. He's obviously got very wealthy owners involved. He's changed the ownership structure of the teams, and the fact that club valuations have exploded since 2008 tells you a lot. The fact that the league has expanded, from 10 to 30 teams under his tenure, you could argue they've expanded too quickly, potentially. But at the same time, while this is all going on, right now the MLS is considering copying the International League schedule when it comes to football leagues and going to a winter league. So season starts in August, September and finishes in about now in April, May time. Because their playoffs clash with the NFL season starting, and so they don't, and it's a lengthy break with the international break. So they're trying to sync their season up potentially into that 2027 with the rest of the major footballing leagues and footballing nations around the world, with an August to May season rather than a February to October season. And it will also work with the international calendar as well. That's something that does hamper the MLS. But there we go. There's a quick look at MLS Commissioner Don Garber, his time at the MLS. Some really interesting things to look at. I didn't cover every single thing that he's done at the MLS, but expansion, the club valuations and how they've really improved, the fact they've got a lot of teams, several teams in Canada that are also really strong markets as well, which is important. The media rights now, is you managed to sell them and do really well, growing their media rights and their value of their media rights, and also breaking boundaries a little bit and pushing the boundaries with having sponsors on jerseys before any other major league did that. All the other major leagues did that post-COVID. He was doing that, 15 years before the pandemic. Every other league was a bit standoffish and not really wanting to do it. They decided to, all the other major footballing nations do it. They've been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases, since the 70s. We're going to do it. And he stuck with it. They did it. Criticised at the time for Europeanising the sport, but at the same time it was important because at that time the league didn't have any money, and that was a way of generating revenue for the teams at the time. So there we go. There's a brief look at MLS Commissioner Don Garber. Place your thoughts in the comments section below. And thank you very much for supporting the channel. If you like what you see, hit like, subscribe and membership button. But for me for now, it is goodbye. I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon.